Okay, good morning. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming here to Small Business Enters the Chat, where we'll be talking about AI innovation and Project Linchpin. My name is Casey Rock. I'm a computer scientist at the Army Capability Development Command, DevCom. Underneath DevCom, I work at C5ISR. So I've been involved with a lot of the programs that are going to be pioneering AI, specifically Project Linchpin. Now, this is a great opportunity for everybody here because after the last presentation, we talked big strategy, big ideas. We had senior leaders from industry and the Army talk about how we're going to try to solve this problem. And it's a tough problem, right? Everybody has AI solutions. But what's really unique about small business and how we can fit in is that we're trying to craft the strategy around how the Army uses and takes leverage from industry, specifically small business. So why we're here today, we've got a lot of folks on this panel, and what's great about this is you have the opportunity to learn about some of the programs that are tailored towards small business, specifically Army xTech and the SBIR program, and you get to hear what this means for you. Right? Why are you here talking to us today? It's a really great opportunity. You'll hear about decoding the Army's digital transformation and why that's important to folks like us who preach transformation and modernization. You'll hear about integration and accelerating synergy between Army and entrepreneurs, how we can leverage the best-of-breed technologies from entrepreneurs into our processes. And then more importantly, and I think the most important thing, is how we can empower the soldier through this modernization and how we can find a way to get AI to actually make an impact to their workflows. So just one statement, I'll say that we are recording this, and then there will be an online posted at the Army xTech website. So without further ado, we'll start introducing the members of our panel. We'll start with Dr. Willis.
Oh, great. I guess we're going out of order. No, it's great to be here. I do appreciate everyone coming and joining us this morning. So I'm Matt Willis. I work in the office that manages all of Army acquisition and research and development. And specifically, in that role, I manage many of our small business facing programs, specifically, focusing on innovation. So the xTech program is a prize competition. It's kind of the easy button to, getting your foot in the door in terms of understanding Army challenges. And we really make it simple to work with the government, or at least as simple as we can, because it is still the government. But and then we also have the Small Business Innovation Research Program. So this is actually a program where the Army will pay for research and development to be executed by you, a small business, in support of your capability. On average, per year, we're investing about $350 million in small businesses across the country. AI is a big focus for us, as Mr. Bang mentioned on the last panel. It's really critical that we tap into innovation that's happening in the private sector, identify ways to apply that to Army challenges. And just this year, just in AI-focused small businesses, we're investing over $100 million. And again, I think that demonstrates, our focus, again, on how we can tap into innovation that's happening across the country to support our soldiers.
Great, thank you. We'll pass it over to Brandy Chesney.
Thank you, Casey. Thank you, Dr. Willis. Brandy Chesney, PEO IEWNS, which is Program Executive Office, Intelligence, Electronic Warfare, and Sensors. I'm here as a representative of Project Linchpin. My focus specifically is as a procurement coordinator, so facilitating the acquisition and developing the contract strategy for Project Linchpin. You'll hear us talk about AI innovation, and within PEO IEWNS, Project Linchpin is setting itself up as the ecosystem or the infrastructure for delivering AI systems and services to the Army. Now, there's nothing particularly innovative about a pipeline. We could purchase a pipeline off the shelf. It's the way that Project Linchpin is doing this, the way that they're pushing small business innovation, the way that they're pushing openness and modularity, that really is going to bring AI innovation to the Army and allow us to scale.
No, well said, and I think that's something that we live every day, right, with Linchpin. And last but certainly not least, Major Staha.
Thank you, Chris. So Major Nick Staha, I work in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology in the Digital Transformation Directorate, and we have the task to digitally transform this small entity we know as the U.S. Army, and to do as the Secretary of the Army said on Saturday, go faster. in deploying our capabilities out to warfighters so that we remain the premier warfighting force in the world.
Fantastic. Well, I think at this point we can start diving into some of the questions that we have, and they're really tailored toward the topics that you heard today. All interrelated, right? All of them are focused on AI, but trying to get at certain portions of how we accomplish this. So to start off, I think we'll go to the big one, scaling AI, and I'll pose this to the group. How can organizations balance the need for flexibility and scalability in AI systems, and what challenges arise in regards? So maybe Dr. Willis, if you want to start us off, and then we can pass this there.
Sure. So I certainly think, at least from the overarching Army digital transformation strategy, right, is how can we take processes, that have traditionally been, paper-based, and bring us into, well, the today world, right? I mean, we all in our daily lives rely on capabilities that have this core strategic underpinnings, that are rooted in AI and digital capabilities. But I think so from a small business, scaling perspective, right? We're trying to figure out within the Army, really writ large with our innovation strategy, again, how can we tap into innovation that's already happening in the private sector, for commercial-based applications, and scale those in a way that support the highly complicated, highly stochastic, highly unpredictable environment that we face, that our soldiers face, in their missions. And so I think that, again, what we're trying to do from a investment strategy, again, is how can we help businesses navigate that path, right? Understanding that through research and development investments we make through, let's say, the Small Business Innovation Research Program, which are up to about $2 million each, you can accomplish things with that, but you can't accomplish everything. So again, we've been really trying to develop a holistic layered strategy for how businesses can leverage Army resources to benefit them in terms of their commercial applications, but then how can we link all of those programs and projects together to support our needs?
No, fantastic, and I think this is a great transition to one of the programs that's really getting after this, and I'll pose this to Brandy.
So if I can, and kind of take that and add on to what Dr. Willis was saying, and we think about AI systems and operationalizing them, what our current model is very stovepiped, it's very siloed. And Linchpin is attempting to flip that by using a collaborative approach, collaborative across the DoD. We're partnering with the Navy, we're learning from their AI efforts through Project Ammo. We're in active engagements with AI2C, with CDAO, DIU. We could just play alphabet soup up here, it would go on for a while, but this is a change from how we have typically approached projects within the Army, but it's critical for that element of scaling and also the element of modernizing. So then I think the question really becomes, why small business? Because you have your pulse, or your finger on the pulse of development. And within your small business ecosystems, and particularly for a nascent technology such as AI, you're able to help inform and shape the government and our AI initiatives.
And I'd like to add to that in following up on comments from Mr. Young Bang, our principal deputy who spoke earlier. He said to get after AI, we've got to decouple the software from the hardware, and we've got to decouple the data from the software. And there are a few ways that we're getting after that right now. So about 3 months ago, the senior acquisition executive for the Army wrote a memo that separates our material release authority for software from hardware. So if you're familiar with the way the Army has done things in the past, it takes a long time to get a material release out. So as part of our effort to use modern software practices, he has decentralized the decision-making authority from essentially the 4-star level, and now it's gone down to the PEO level, and made that a more adaptive process. And then the second thing that I'd like to talk about is with decoupling the data. So we are on the cusp of putting out a unified data reference architecture, which we're calling the UDRA. And that is going to level the playing field in terms of how data is structured and the formats for the metadata, so that we create a workable data mesh. And that data standardization is what's going to enable an AI at scale across the force, so that we are able to share data and allow for some of these exquisite capabilities that we're going to have when AI implementation comes around. And would add to that, give a sneak preview here in the spirit of South by Southwest. In the coming weeks, I think you're going to see an announcement from ASALT leadership about an implementation for the UDRA that's going to allow businesses, including small businesses, to go in and start to experience that and see how that operates.
That's fantastic, right? And I think it's good that we've now got ASALT representation, we've got Linchpin working this, and I think really the big question for why everybody's here today is, how does small business fit into this picture, right? How can they help inform this information, inform us as we go through this? Because as Mr. Banks said, we don't know all the dimensions of AI. It's super complex, right? And a lot of times we understand Army acquisition, but how does small business fit into this?
I mean, I personally believe, and maybe I'm biased based on my job, but I personally believe that small businesses are critical for the Army, for the DoD, for the U.S. Writ large, to stay abreast of state-of-the-art capability development, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that I'll go back to one of the earlier comments, right, which was traditional capability development in the Department of Defense, right? It was typically very stovepiped. You start with a research project, it goes into acquisition, eventually there's some engineering development, risk reduction, goes into production, and then we acquire and field the system. And this takes what? I don't know, like 20 years. It's crazy to think that a small business would be able to overcome or be able to sustain such a long timeline. And so I think one of the great things about how the Army is approaching AI through Project Linchpin and through other things is to really flatten that, right? We are having synchronization at the ground level in terms of all these different capabilities that will contribute to our integration of AI across the force. And that means that there are opportunities for small businesses to contribute across the entire spectrum of capabilities that we're developing. And so I think utilizing programs such as xTech, such as SBIR, such as other mechanisms that allow small businesses to contribute to our mission is really empowering and enabling Project Linchpin, vice the other way around.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think this is a good transition to Brandy.
I might just carry that one for a minute.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I do want to just add on, I think it's an incredible opportunity for small businesses. I describe myself as a non-traditional defense employee. You hear non-traditional defense contractors, I really resonate with that. I didn't come from a pathway that was directly through the military. I didn't come from a defense industry, I came from private industry. I had my preconceived notions about what working with the Department of Defense was like. So when I see small businesses come to Project Linchpin, it really is an opportunity for us to mentor and engage and interact. And that's where we really create that culture of innovation that's desperately needed for the modernization efforts that the ASALT office is standing up. I think I really just wanted to add there that I think, particularly with Project Linchpin, we understand the challenge of small businesses is getting into the government ecosystem. And we're using pathways such as CyberOffice and xTech to open that door and to really encourage small businesses to come and partner with us.
Yeah, and if I could add one more thing, I think what's really unique about Linchpin is that we have folks who are really high-tech computer science nerds like myself, and then we have folks like Brandy who are genius in acquisition and trying to figure out an acquisition strategy that really gears toward innovation. It's been one of our most important challenges, and I think this really comes to collaboration, right? How does Linchpin collaborate with industry? How can industry collaborate with the Army, right? These are all the things I think are going to be critical for us moving forward. So I'd love to see what your ideas are on collaboration.
I thought you were insulting me and saying I wasn't high tech, but I can operate my smartphone most of the time. My teenagers help a little bit of the time. So to your point about participation and collaboration, I think Dr. Willis really started to hit at this. In the Linchpin pipeline, there's an opportunity for all of industry at multiple elements of insertion in the pipeline. So it's small, medium, and large. You look at the DoD and you're getting the head nod with over 800 S&T research efforts that were launched in the past 2 years. There's a giant head nod that's this space that we'd want to invest in significantly. We're going to look to small businesses to help inform our decisions about governance, about standards for metadata, about open API inference points. And there's an opportunity through these pathways for us to bring in that innovation and for you to inform us as, as we modernize, what is best of breed? What does best of industry look like? What's the newest, the latest, and how do we implement that in our particular use case?
Yeah, well said, and I'd love to see your opinions.
Absolutely, and follow up that as well. There are a variety of ways that small business can engage with the Army to influence our governance and decision making. So for example, our office recently conducted a request for information through the sam.gov website about policy for software bills of material, right? And I want everybody to know that if you respond to those, we are going to, first of all, of course, read everything, but then we break it down by demographics. And so one of the things we looked at is, if there's a requirement for software bill of materials, what do large businesses say about it? What do small and medium-sized businesses say about it? Right, and in this case, the response from everyone was positive, right? But we look at that, and if it looks like there's going to be a challenge for small businesses to compete, then we're going to probably change the policy, right? And make sure that opportunity is there. And the second thing I'd like to point to is that, as you saw with Mr. Bang earlier, the senior leadership at ASALT is very eager and interested to work with small businesses. And so, for example, you may have read where Mr. Bang is working with industry for a proof of concept for cyber as a service for small business, right? Like helping, and that looks at helping defray some of the cost for interacting with the Army, like Brandy said, because we recognize that access to Army systems, to Army people, sometimes Army facilities and bases can really be a challenge. And that program in particular looks at that ICAM piece to enable small businesses and defray some costs. So that said, when you engage with Mr. Bang, as he said earlier, the key is to meet him halfway, and they will, receive, multiple pitches every day from industry, right? What stands out in their minds are the ones that, thought about what the Army does and thought about a particular application for the Army. And where small business can really get creative in this is, to think, outside of the box, if you will, of all the different applications for AI that are out there, because I don't think anybody could say authoritatively that they know all the applications for AI out there. I mean, the Army has a tremendous number of sensors that like normal people don't think about, right? When you think about the electromagnetic spectrum and all that kind of stuff, right? Generates tons of data that's passively floating out there. I think one good example comes from PEO IWS with the sensor suite that's on the helicopters for defending those aircraft, right? They have an exquisite sensor suite. They fly over the terrain, right? Think of all the data that's collecting, right? So that's a particular Army one that might not just be something you pick up from observing ordinary business or ordinary life. And so folks that come with ideas that have Army applicability are definitely going to get a lot of interest from the senior leadership.
And I think it really speaks to one of the benefits of utilizing the small business office is it allows the government to buy down risk with nascent technologies. So exactly as you were describing, Nick, these emerging technologies where there may be alternative applications or research approaches that we as the government haven't considered, a small business often will bring that to us, and the small business research grants and awards allow us the opportunity to extend that research and to pursue potential applications within the government.
That's fantastic, and I think a key theme that I keep hearing out of everybody is that there's innovation, collaboration, and one thing I really want to tie on with collaboration is that everybody thinks when we're talking AI, it's who can build the best model, right? How do I increase the performance, the T&E results of this model? When in fact, really, there's a lot of industry involvement that pushes us to say, how do I increase the workflow that makes somebody's experience better? And I'd love to see, given that there's opportunity so much for this space, what are some other ways that we can increase workflow with AI and specifically Project Linchpin? I know that's one of our biggest hurdles.
So I can take this one, and I think you talk about scalability. It for the government and for the Army is about pushing the modernization efforts and consolidating our AI efforts, consolidating our AI talents to deliver really a high quality AI capability in the end. So when I think to your question, Casey, about how do we approach this problem, I think it's also about how do we engage the end user. And with Project Linchpin, the collaboration aspect is there from the initial design concept. We're engaging our end users as our technical points of contact, as judges to review white papers. And it's really interesting to stand up these innovation units within our military commands and see their willingness to participate and tell us when things absolutely will not work. And to also say, have you thought about doing it this way?
Yeah, I think that's perfect, right? Because one thing that we've heard a lot from industry is, user-centered design, and Mr. Bang said soldier-centered design, and this is a perfect example of why this is applicable because, like we said, we could develop really high-tech models, but we need that feedback mechanism to make sure it works. So I'll ask Major Staha, how do we, given that there is this feedback mechanism from the soldiers out there, how can we influence their knowledge about their tasks and their workflows and then design or try to shape technology around that?
Right. So the best way to talk to soldiers, well, you have two options, I think, right? You either talk to real soldiers out in the field, which may or may not be easy for any given company, right? The other thing you can do is put yourself in that perspective. And what I would like to drive home here is, we're not just talking about like infantrymen out in a trench or something like that. I mean, that is definitely a major use case for the Army. As the Secretary said the other day, we're always going to have folks that are carrying packs and rifles on the ground and flying helicopters and driving tanks, but the scope of the Army's activities are vast, right? And you can go down to the Cyber Center of Excellence at Fort Eisenhower, and we've got uniformed service members doing cyber defense of the Army's networks. You can go up, I'm not saying visit these places, right? Because other places we've got are like undisclosed locations around Fort Meade, and we've got soldiers in uniform, doing interesting access type of operations with our adversaries, right? And a lot that stuff is, there's an Army piece to it, right? But then there's also a technical piece that folks can imagine what that looks like and what some of the challenges are that the Army has, and we're going to need. Obviously that's an area where we need a lot of AI capability as well. And, it's almost like a situation where if you can think of, an activity, then there's a good chance that the Army has some place in it, as Mr. Bang in the last session just talked about with, the Army being the significant actor in coming up with vaccines for coronavirus, right? So, find where the Army has a military occupational specialty or has a unit that does that type of thing, and then think about it from the Army perspective. And I think you can, without necessarily needing to directly engage with soldiers, you can understand use cases that the Army would have.
I think what I was hearing as you were talking about that, Nick, was we tend in AI to jump towards algorithmic warfare. And that isn't the only use case that the Army is looking at. There are multiple use cases, and ultimately with Project Linchpin, what we look at is reducing the cognitive workload on our warfighter. So that can be implemented in many different ways. It's taking tasks that used to be very manual, compiling battle reports or course of action, and looking at AI to how can we push down that decision point so that an AI algorithm is doing that information gathering and helping us make those informed decisions at our military levels.
And this definitely ties to workflow, and I think to what your point is, there's multiple places within the portfolio that AI fits in. Tough question that everybody asks is, how do we buy down the risk of deploying AI? How do we ensure that what we develop is trusted by the end user? And of course, obviously, small businesses, we want help with that. So I'd love to see from Project Linchpin, from digital transformation, and if there's any ideas from small businesses, how they can fit in to help us there. That'd be great insight.
Do you want to start? Anyone?
Go for it.
Okay. Scalable T&E, is that your question?
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about industry collaboration. We talked about buying down risk through the small business office. Scalable, robust T&E. I think you're going to see this coming out soon, and Mr. Bang talked to it as well. We're not looking to buy a better mousetrap. We're looking to say that within the context of the DoD, the way that we deploy AI has to be looked at in a very safe and secure way. That is the inherent context of the environment that we're deploying in. So what we need are robust and automated T&E solutions that help us meet that use case, that help us say that the case for deploying AI within the government is going to be slightly different than deploying AI to your smartphone, because there's an inherent risk in there. How do we address that with small businesses, right? We give them the right pathways to get involved, and a key piece is that we open ourselves up to the degree that we can to be open and transparent about giving access to small business to data that you need to inform your systems to our use cases. And that's an initiative we're working on right now. To how do we get small businesses into an open source community so that they can have access to these specific Army data and develop solutions for us that are high quality.
And yeah, I would certainly add that, one way, or there's a few ways to get your foot in the door, right? Because I know we've been talking about all of these complex challenges, right, that the Army's facing. I think that one point, though, that I'd like to go back to is that we're not expecting small businesses or the innovation community per se to understand the challenges that we face or that our soldiers face, on the battlefield. We're really looking to simplify, our R&D in a way that we can identify, the core technical underpinnings for a capability that might have an application in the, in the private or civilian sector, but also might have an application to our systems, right? And so I think that using programs such as, the xTech program or using the Small Business Innovation Research Program is a way that you can build that partnership. So again, the SBIR program is a mechanism whereby the Army will pay you up to $2 million for research and development to support a need. But it's not just money, right? It's also having that connectivity to, an Army stakeholder. Have opportunities to tap into data or into our, our sandbox for being able to test different, software solutions, or being able to have a, cooperative research and development agreement with our different laboratories, across the Army. So again, you can leverage resources that we have available to help you be successful. So I think that's a big piece here, right, is that yes, the Army has a lot of big AI challenges. Yes, I believe there's a lot of great things happening in the private sector that we can apply to our challenges, but we aren't expecting the private sector to go at it alone, right? We're here to help, and we want you to be successful, because again, all of these investment dollars that we are putting into AI-based capabilities, either from a science and technology perspective, from an engineering perspective, from an application perspective, is really because we want to develop a capable system and then utilize it. So it makes us different from, let's say, like the National Science Foundation, which is great things for science across the country, but they're just really seeding innovation. Again, we're trying to both seed innovation, mature it, buy down risk in our systems, and then acquire it.
Yeah, and I think when I hear you talk about that, it's the concept of the valley of death, right? We've talked about this before. How can you utilize programs such as Project Catalyst, such as xTech, to cross that valley of death with programs of record? We categorically have not been incredibly successful in this area, but Project Linchpin is aiming to change that through a very modular and agile contracting strategy. You're going to see competition built into very short periods of performance, rapidly turning over contracts so that we can ensure we're getting the best of breed, but so that we're also employing a competitive ecosystem where another small business who's developing a nascent technology can come up and come into the ecosystem. And we want to make sure that those opportunities, like Dr. Willis is saying, are available for all.
And I would just add, Dr. Wilson and Brandy, you guys have already, I think, hit this. I just want to put the final hammer on it, which is I think it's going to be important for businesses to understand their risk profiles when they are bringing products to the Army. Mr. Bang talked about it earlier. I mean, we want to get to the point where we're buying third-party generated algorithms, but there's going to have to be risk assessments along with those, and folks are going to have to understand the supply chain of those algorithms. And I think very nascent drafts of this idea right now, but you're likely to, at some point in the future, see something like an AI bomb, right, where folks can describe their lineage. And so that's something to start looking about, and that will make a competitive difference later on.
And what challenges do we face from digital transformation? I mean, I think we get very ambitious, right? AI is a hot topic, but what are some of the challenges that you see in your career?
Right. So, digital transformation is our task, right? The purpose is to get to agile, to get to continuous, to get to CI/CD, right? So that we're delivering continuously to the warfighters. And so the challenges of digital transformation, as you might imagine, for an organization with the size and scope of the Army, tend to be cultural, and they tend to be process-oriented, right? So, we have a workforce that wasn't necessarily, brought up in the digitally native, right, in terms of program management and that sort of thing. So, one of the directives from Mr. Bang has been to, upskill the workforce by taking courses, and that's all about making sure that our acquisition workforce can communicate well with industry, right, and be good product owners for the things that we're asking from industry, and understand how software is developed and processes of agile. As Mr. Bang said, he's the Army Scrum Master, right, and so flowing down from that on our own Scrum teams, we've got to at least understand what the Scrum Masters are doing, and then be good product owners ourselves. And then, the other piece is process-wise, and that is something our senior leaders are spending most of their days on, right? So talked about the software directive that the Secretary of the Army announced on Saturday, and if you haven't read it, recommend you go read it. There's a lot in there, right? There's a lot about, like Brandy was talking about, bridging the valley of death. There's talking there, we've talked a little bit about the challenges of contracting with the Army, right? There's a piece in there about how the Army is standing up a contracting center of excellence for working with software at Aberdeen Proving Ground, right? So there are a lot of those pieces in there that I think are basically footstop hints, for working with the Army as we go through the digital transformation process.
Well, that's well said, and I think the next question naturally is why is this a good fit for small business? We lay out the challenges, we lay out that innovation is derived from small business, but Dr. Willis, from your expertise, why do you think it's a great fit for small businesses to be where they're at today with the way the Army looks to AI?
So yeah, I mean, I would go back to what I stated earlier, right, and that this is a holistic Army strategy, right, in terms of trying to implement and deploy this digital transformation, across all aspects of the Army, from upskilling to Project Linchpin to inherent capabilities within all of our defense systems. And so with this idea, again, of this open systems architecture that we're trying to integrate into as many of our systems as we can, that is really a pivot, I'd say, away from, again, the traditional approach of we're developing and deploying these large systems which are being developed by one large prime business, and they just leverage their own internal research and development dollars to improve the capabilities. The pivot here, particularly again with AI and digital transformation, is the underpinning is there's opportunities for throughout the life cycle of these capabilities that we're developing, which again can span 5, 10, 15, 20, even longer years. Opportunities for small businesses and capabilities to be spun in and spun out, right? So it's not just you need to get in to develop a capability at the beginning, right? There are opportunities throughout the life cycle for small businesses to improve our capabilities, to change or transform the way that we operate. And I think utilizing programs like SBIR, like other mechanisms, can really empower and enable that.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd love to kind of talk about with Brandy. Linchpin is trying to leverage these because the critical technologies, the critical innovation comes from small businesses, from what we've been engaged with. And I think that's one of the big things we've seen with Project Linchpin is just how can we engage with small business, understand what their experts are thinking, and then come back to the high level with how we can do this from a strategy perspective. And I think it's definitely akin to what we've been going after.
It is, yeah. I think we've had on Project Linchpin 200 plus industry engagements. So I hope no one is saying that we're not getting out there or making ourselves available.
Multiply it by 2. It's close to 500 at this point.
Okay. Yes, so making ourselves available, I think, sorry, what was your question, Casey? I lost myself there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really like how Linchpin is using small businesses,
yes.
right?
So that agile piece that Dr. Willis was talking about for a moment, there's a place in the pipeline for the prime. Sure, there's a place in the pipeline for the small business, for the medium, based on use case and capability, and what are you bringing as a value proposition to the Army. And so we're not going to see within the systems of AI that vendor lock situation that we as an Army have typically gotten ourselves into, where we've locked into a years-long contract with a prime and then been unable to modernize at the speed at which we can outpace the threat. And so within Linchpin, you are bringing in that spirit of competition. You are bringing in rapid, agile contracting so that we can get more small businesses into the ecosystem. We can create a competitive environment that will give us these emerging innovative ideas as well.
Oh, perfect.
And if I could just add, because why should you work with the Army, right? And there's just a straight business piece to it, right? But with AI, you may have a different experience to this. But we have a small business that is actually the prime on a system that does navigation for soldiers, GPS-based system, right? Next generation Dagger, if you know what that is. So, the last time I interacted with that small business, they were out at Fort Huachuca doing a limited user test on this system, and they spent a week running around in the woods with a platoon from the 101st Airborne. And I think there is this kind of extra thing that goes with working with the Army, right? Like you can probably find easier, businesses and organizations to work with than the Army, right? For the reasons that we've talked about today. But, these, little experiences will come along, right? Where you're with the 18-year-olds out in the woods, right? Sharing war stories, they're sharing war stories, you're sharing your version of war stories, right? And, you're figuring out how to make sure those 18, 19-year-olds get back to their families, right? After, going somewhere and fighting for the country. So I think that, if everything's equal, right, and you can go work with somebody else because you have limited resources, you have to invest your resources wisely, like that can be a factor, right? Because it can be a cool thing to work with the Army and know that you're doing a good thing.
Yeah, I think we still get credit for the internet, right? Like,
Yeah.
we do some cool things. And just to add to that, as we're looking at Project Linchpin, and specifically these modernizations within the Army, we keep talking about openness and transparency, launching open API standards, open frameworks for architecture. I think there will be, just sitting from my small chair, a significant impact on society and how it views AI as well. And to be in the forefront of that, informing the governance around AI, it's an incredible opportunity for a small business.
Absolutely, and thank you for all the insight. This was great, and I want to pass this over to Dr. Willis. Before we conclude, I know that you have an announcement that you wanted to make.
Well, we do have some time for questions, but yeah. So I think that, you know, and I appreciate the panel. You know, I think that talking again about Project Linchpin, AI innovation, how the Army can be more deliberate about integrating capabilities, you know, across the profile of our investments, and specifically again how small businesses can contribute. Right, it's critical for the Army to ensure that we are, you know, integrating and deploying the most technically capable solutions. We must rely on small businesses, which are at the forefront of technology and capability development. And so I know, again, we've talked about, or the audience, you might be a bit overwhelmed, right? We've talked about all these challenges that we face in the Army. We've talked about, you know, some different opportunities for resourcing, for getting your foot in the door. But, you know, I wanted to here certainly say that, you know, this isn't all ethereal, right? This isn't theoretical, this is real. And so I wanted to announce that, you know, starting today, we're opening a new competition, a new xTech competition, focused specifically on scalable AI and Project Linchpin. In a minute, I'll have Brandy, you know, speak to some of the details. But so throughout this competition, you know, we're offering up to $600,000 in cash to small businesses, and cash is great because you can use it for anything. And in addition to that, up to $25 million in small business innovation research awards that will come after this. And one of the ways that the Army uses the xTech program is really to, again, make it easier for businesses to work with us and move very quickly, right? So we can, so this competition is opening today. I think the website is live now. And we'll be moving very, very quickly in a matter of months to select you know, a handful of companies who will then be developing these AI solutions for the Army. So again, $25 million in R&D awards, you know, plus, you know, $600,000 in cash. Again, we're really trying to move quickly because we recognize that, you know, the pace of government, working with the government, working with bureaucracy can be challenging, right? And it just doesn't work for small businesses, particularly when the half-life of a technology is, you know, 6 or 12 months, and the government takes 2 years to get someone working on a critical R&D project. You know, that's just, you know, the timelines just don't match up. So again, definitely want to make sure that, you know, we emphasize, right, that we're putting, you know, our money where our mouth is, if you will. But I guess, Brandy, can you speak to a little bit of the
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk through AI innovation, I think the question really is for Project Linchpin is how do you generalize an architecture and a strategy and infrastructure for AI and then scale that? And then similarly, how do you harness the power of scalability in AI? We've seen AI models, as you give larger data sets, as you retrain models, you inherently see this scaling or this bettering of the model. How does Linchpin take that concept and scale that across the Army and provide a secure and trusted pipeline? So there are 3 topics that we're going after with this new xTech Scalable AI 2 competition. The first is scalable tools for automated AI risk management framework and algorithmic analysis. I think about this as an automated way to get after a risk or a threat class identification for AI. We don't think there is one tool to solve it all. We absolutely do not think that. But what we are looking for from industry is how do we assess the risk of pre-trained models? We know our future is bringing in third-party models. How do we assess that risk? How do we establish various benchmarks? And what are the robust solutions that the Army can deploy to ensure that secure and trusted AI? So we're looking for toolkits, we're looking for solutions, we're looking for that innovation and that automated AI risk management framework space. That's our first one. Second one is scalable techniques, robust T&E of AI operations pipeline. So testing and evaluation. Within PO, IEW&S, our focus is on that intelligence, electronic warfare, and sensor. So you see us focus on imagery, on video, on RF, but we also really want to get after these really high standards that the government has for T&E. Prior to deploying any AI solution to our end user, we need to have a robust system of testing and evaluating that model. I think there's this concept of the ship of Theseus, right? As you retrain a model, you are essentially putting a new piece on each time, and you're bringing yourself further away from what your ground truth was that you used to train that model. How do we inherently, to the best that we can, say that that is a secure and trusted model? Like, is that model at the end, when you've replaced each piece of it by retraining it, the same model that you started with? It's a challenging problem to get after, but we truly believe that small business has innovative ways to address this. If we can bring it automated, that would be even better too. But we really want those novel approaches to T&E. And then finally, scalable techniques for prioritizing a center of mass algorithm. So you've heard us talk a lot about how Project Linchpin is going to do this digital transformation, a culture shift to deliver value through the adoption of advanced technologies. Talked about the why. I talked a little bit about reducing the cognitive workload on our user. And then the how is the center of mass idea. Is deploying an AI system in a specific use case that would take a lot of the cognitive workload off of our user and bring it into specific pieces of, of information they would be manually putting together. So how do we approach that? How can we deploy AI in that specific use? That was a lot. But I do think we're going to have questions, and I'm sure you can always find Casey or myself in the reception afterwards. Yep. And we are posting it live as well. Or we will be posting it live? Okay.
Yep, and just to reiterate, the website is live, so if you want to read those topics over again, feel free to check it out. And at this point, I think we'll open up to some questions. We've got some folks ready to go after it. So
I'll just speak really loudly, because I'm sorry. So I have a ton of questions, and I'm sure I'm going to find out more as I look up Linchpin and xTech. But primarily for these purposes, my questions are on the process for applying. I personally work at the joint level for the DoD, and I'm very familiar with enterprise, thank you, as well as the acquisition process there, which is a beast of its own. And I'm learning the SBIR process, which is uniquely challenging. So my question, I guess, is in the sense of Linchpin and xTech, how's the application process differ, or is it still part of the SBIR framework?
So I will say, we've made some significant changes in the last few years. So especially in the Army, again, recognizing, it's not like just the last few years we recognize, how small businesses, can contribute to our mission. But about 3 years ago, we made a deliberate strategic shift in terms of how we could be better, stewards and make it easier for businesses to work with us. So I will say, across both SBIR, the Army SBIR process and the xTech process, we've made it very easy. So, the application process is like a 1 or 2 page white paper. It's a nothing. And I'd say historically, yes, within the Army, in the SBIR program, sometimes the applications could be, 40 or 50 pages, which is crazy, right? I mean, that's a significant time and work investment for small businesses. And again, if they're trying to balance, okay, I can, work with the government, which it's going to take really long. There's going to be long lead times. There might be a great payoff at the end, but, my funding runway is very short. Or, pursuing commercial applications, under the old way, they would almost always pick the commercial application, right? So again, we've been really trying to be deliberate about how we make it easy for businesses to get their foot in the door through very simplified processes. Through our SBIR process, we can get companies on contract in less than a month. It's, again, changing all aspects of the program so that, we can, harness innovations, at the speed of innovation, vice at the speed of, normal government.
Great. Thank you very much. And I'm sure you're already aware, and I'll just leave with a comment, that the SBIR application process is so challenging that there are companies who help you with the SBIR process, right? So hopefully we get to a point where that's not as necessary. Thank you again.
And I think to that, you guys have an accelerator program, right, as well, to offer like a mentoring through the small business process, not the application, but through those unique small business challenges.
Yes, so for both the xTech and SBIR program, we do have an xTech or a business accelerator to basically provide that, those underpinnings to, again, help a company be successful, whether they become, a DoD or an Army partner or not. Absolutely.
Next question.
Yeah, hi, my name's Brian. First off, just thank you for serving our country. You've been using the term small business, and obviously that can look like a lot of different things. And I was just curious to know if you could maybe talk about some of the attributes of small businesses that end up working with you that thrive versus some that you maybe hired or brought into the fold, and then it was like beyond just the solution space that they were working in, like brought challenges. So just if you could talk in that area.
Sure. So I certainly think, that, and yes, of course, there's the government definition of what a small business is, and, all that aside, but certainly small businesses that are successful, or businesses that in general are successful, are those that, are, I'd say, question the status quo, those that, are willing to pivot, those are willing to take a chance, and recognize, again, that this is all moving very quickly, and we're, I think one of the great ways that the Army has leveraged a lot of these programs, right, is to recognize that it's a way for us to take a risk. In a lot of ways, the Army cannot take risk. But when we're investing in, innovative technology development, we need to take risk, and in that way, we need to recognize and understand that the R&D, the capability development, it might not always work out, but I think the companies that have invested in a capability, and if it didn't work from a technical standpoint, they might pivot and then continue to engage with us. So there are actually a few specific examples for companies that participated in the xTech program early on. They didn't win. They took all of this feedback that we provide. So one of the things that I didn't mention is that we're trying to be as transparent as possible. So we'll provide feedback, good, bad, indifferent, but mostly, companies that have been able to leverage that feedback and pivot have been extremely successful. And so I think that, certainly the willingness to put yourself out there, and again, not rely on, the same old status quo. And we've also had companies that have worked together, again, to develop a capability. So I guess did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. We'll provide a little more context, and I'd like to hear Nick's opinion too. I think of this as like a paradigm expansion, not necessarily a paradigm shift, that when you're working with a small business, we often inside the DoD have to do our own internal education about this is not a typical prime. It's a partnership. They need to be, small businesses that do well and thrive are those who are willing to ask questions when you're in the contract, who are willing to be informed, and who are also willing to challenge some of our solutions as well, to say, how do we get to a yes, not, I can't do that for you. And that mutual partnership is really what makes small businesses thrive.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, from a program manager standpoint, when you look at the risks associated with small business, right, like a lot of it will come down to, do they have the reach back, to go back to a term from the last session, multidisciplinary approach, right? I mean, it can be a challenge, for a small business when they hit that roadblock that requires some degree of knowledge outside of their core competency. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they, need to go out and hire somebody or something like that, but are they part of an ecosystem and a network that allows them to, to reach back or whatever they need to do to overcome that obstacle.
Yeah, like the Project Vista initiative, and even Dr. Willis was talking about the partnership and the teaming. The DoD we can't tell you to partnership, we can't give you guidance on teaming, but if you as industry choose to partner with a counterpart who might fill in some of your capability gap, and together you bring us a solution that's well developed, thorough, and innovative, that's a win for everyone.
Okay, so I think we're getting close to time, so if we want to have one more question, sure, that'd be perfect.
That was actually kind of a perfect segue into my question. I work for a small business that's had the privilege to work on a number of these SBIR contracts with you all. And in my experience, one of the things we've always been interested in is understanding what the other companies who are working on some of these contracts are actually doing. Not specifically so that we can outcompete them, but more so that we can understand how we can better collaborate. And I was wondering if you've ever given any thought into how the Army can serve as sort of a matchmaker, so to speak, between small businesses who may not even be aware that each other exists, such that the sum of the parts might be greater than any one piece.
Yes, 100%. It's like a seated question. No, but so one of the initiatives that we've been working for the last year, because you're right, I'd say that across the Department of Defense, I read some statistic that there's thousands and thousands of information systems, and like a whole 3 of them talk to each other, or something ludicrous like that, right? So, and it's a big challenge, right? Understanding from a technology development, technology integration perspective, particularly, for many of these capabilities that are going to require multiple different capabilities to, develop a holistic solution. Having a tool that provides opportunity for collaboration is critical. And so for, the last, I guess, 12 to 15 months, we've been developing the Army Tech Marketplace, which will serve exactly what you described. It's a, system that, has vetted capabilities linked to small businesses, whether they were developed through SBIR program or not. And it'll be a tool that can not only provide opportunities for Army stakeholders, such as the program executive offices or PMs when they're doing market research, to identify what's out there in terms of small businesses or large businesses in terms of what they've developed, but also provide an organic capability to seed that collaboration across small businesses, or also potentially with large businesses. So, I think that, again, we've talked a lot about how small businesses contribute to the ecosystem, but large businesses can also help with many things in terms of enhanced capability development, manufacturing, scalability, deployability, engineering, risk reduction. And so a tool like this, we think, will really help to provide those connections. So absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate everybody attending. This concludes our panel. One thing I'd like to invite everybody will be at a reception over here from 12:30 to 2. So please feel free to join us. We'll be engaging with our team up here as well as the senior leaders that pitched before. So thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.